One of the most important skills to master in Fortnite is knowing how to approach a box. Over time, this has evolved because players just keep getting better, which means you can no longer just drop down and attempt to take it because your opponent will just instantly make an edit and eliminate you. Instead, you need to approach a wall and attempt to take it in a way where you take little to no damage. In order to master this, I'll be going over the most common building structures you encounter in-game and how to approach each one based on the momentum of the fight. Now, before we go over any approaches or building structures, let's talk about two important skills you need to develop as a habit. The first one, awareness. When it comes to approaching a box, it's important that you scout your surroundings for any potential third party. If there's an enemy nearby, make sure to approach the wall on the opposite side where the third party can't see you. That way, whenever you're fighting, the third party will focus on your opponent instead of you. This will ensure you don't take any damage, and it will also help with applying pressure to your enemy. Once you identify the side you're going to approach your enemy, you will also want to identify if your opponent has either a cone or a stair inside their box. This will help you predict what your enemy might do once you take their wall. Or in some scenarios where they have nothing inside, you can take advantage and place a stair or cone so they can escape. The last thing you would want to master is the art of baiting and confusing your opponent. You can simply do this by either using your pickaxe, movement, or by placing builds. When baiting your opponent with your pickaxe, there's multiple ways to do so. You can bait him by pulling out your pickaxe for 1 second and then instantly switching back to your shotgun, or by swinging once at a wall and switching back to your shotgun, or finally by canceling your first swing at the wall. So basically, switch to your shotgun as soon as pickaxe about to hit the wall. This last one is amazing when trying to avoid getting pre-fired. When it comes to baiting your opponent with your movement, it's pretty simple. Just make your opponent think they have a shot on you and then just use your movement to hide behind cover. And the final baiting technique you want to master is building, which is literally placing builds one direction and then quickly turn around and approach from a different direction. All of these skills of baiting your opponent are so you're always ready to capitalize on your opponent's mistakes. So to summarize, don't get caught with your pickaxe out, otherwise you'll get punished and the momentum of the fight can easily shift. Which brings me to a simple rule that you should almost never break, and that is don't ever double pickaxe a wall. By doing so, you let your opponent get a free shot on you and potentially be the reason you lose the fight. So let's talk about building structures. So you're either going to encounter a 1x1, a 2x1, a 2x2, or an L-shaped structure. So let's start with the most simple one, a 1x1. Whenever you spot an opponent with this structure, you can approach it in many different ways. Something you should keep in mind is that every single player has a different playstyle and skill level. So depending on their skill level and playstyle, you can choose how to approach their box. So if you see the player isn't as good or you've dealt significant damage and want to keep up the pressure, then you can get away with some simple approaches. On this first approach, you would want to weaken the wall with your AR so you can quickly replace it with your shotgun and end the fight. On this next approach, you would want to place a cone when approaching the wall and proceed to bait your opponent with your pickaxe, or by just simply standing still and staring at your opponent. You'd be very surprised how many players panic and make an instant edit to do some counter damage. And if your opponent doesn't go for the bait, then use the cone you've placed to leave the fight and try a different approach. Another simple approach that you can get away with is to drop down and place a cone as you're dropping and then instantly jump and pre-fire. While these approaches aren't the safest or the best, they are good enough if your opponent isn't as good or you've dealt significant damage. But what if your opponent is good or you're trying to play it safe? Well, one of the most efficient ways pros approach a 1x1 is by initiating a diagonal box fight. To set this up, simply place 2 cones and 2 walls. By placing the cones, you make sure your opponent can't block you off with a ramp or potentially cone you from exiting your own box. The walls you place serve as protection if your opponent decides to exit from either side. The only thing you need to worry about is being halfway behind this wall. So whenever your opponent makes an edit, they will barely be able to see you, giving you a peeker's advantage. While the diagonal box fight is great, there's another approach that is slightly different and slightly better. And that approach is literally a diagonal setup but from the top. This approach is slightly better because you can use it effectively whenever your opponent has multiple boxes. It works on a simple 1x1, a 2x1, a 2x2, and a L-shaped structure. In addition, this approach makes it difficult for your opponent to deal any significant damage. When you stay close to the wall, they can only see your legs. However, as you move further away, more of your body becomes visible. The real advantage of this approach, however, is the ability to cut off your opponent if they decide to expand out. All of these approaches are great whenever you're trying to take walls. However, you are missing one approach, and that is how to take the cones and floors from your enemies. To do this successfully and avoid taking any damage, just simply make sure to place walls to counter any potential shots or piece control. Once you've placed your walls for protection, make an edit and pickaxe a cone once and instantly switch to your shotgun. That way, if your opponent goes for an edit, you have your shotgun out without any delay, allowing you to shoot him instantly. So overall, we have gone over on how to take walls, tops, and how to be unpredictable and bait your opponent. So what are we missing? Well, the last thing you should master is knowing how to face into a box, which should only be done if your opponent is very weak. There's two ways to do this. The first one is just using a ramp or cone to explode in, which a lot of you already know how to do, but for the purpose of the video, I'll explain. In order to set this exploit, you would want to place a ramp or place a cone and edit these two tiles. Once you've chosen one of these two options, you need to time your pickaxe swing precisely as your head hits the top of the ramp and the wall. If done right, you'll face straight into the box. The second and final exploit is facing in with momentum. In order to do this, you need to run at the wall and break it as soon as your body hits the wall. This exploit's a bit harder to master since you have to get the timing right, but it's also the most effective one out of the two, so if done correctly, your enemy will have a harder time to react to it. With all that being said, remember, being unpredictable is the key to winning fights, so use everything I've shown you in a way that keeps your opponent guessing. And if you play a controller, you need to watch this next video to see why it's holding you back, and hopefully Fortnite sees it too.